Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Shane, and I am a teacher with the Minneapolis School District. 5 years ago, the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, Local 59, sponsored a showing of the movie 13th about the rise of the carceral state at the Capri Theater on Broadway. Our new leaders at the time thought that it would demonstrate their sincerity about social justice to the community. When the film was over, a panel on diversity and inclusion began. Halfway through the discussion, most of the black students in the audience stormed out of the theater and began protesting out in front. When asked what issue they were protesting, they said that the conflation of race with other issues by the panel was insulting to the community. The disconnect was stunning. At that point in time, the mere idea of a teacher's strike in Minneapolis was unthinkable. The teachers lacked the unity, their union didn't have the support of the community, and the legacy of racism hung like a thick cloud over the rarefied air of liberal Minneapolis. I know, I was there. Now, 5 years later, the teachers' union passed a strike vote with 99% support among the rank and file. Thousands of educators took to the streets for 3 weeks with overwhelming support from the community and settled for its first real gains in 50 years. What happened? What made the difference? What are its implications for white community organizers and civic leaders endeavoring to mobilize public engagement or support? For starters, recognizing that overcoming the legacy of racism was essential in building the kind of unity that was needed to win a better deal for all, the students, the taxpayers, or the district. In production for 500 years, we still need to figure out how to disrupt its reproduction in order to fight for the gains we needed. Unity would do it, but what kind of unity? One problem too many white people have is differentiating between racism and other forms of otherization. All these are legitimate grievances against a moribund system, but system defenders try to convince us that they are all behavioral problems that we must check. The bottom line is that race is fundamentally different than other classifications because it is the foundation stone for our economic system's birth and the ordering of all social relations since. It was created out of whole cloth for the express purpose of slaughtering indigenous people as non-human, seizing their land and possessions, and enslaving yet more for cultivating and developing these lands for economic gain. Understanding this key difference is the starting point for building any kind of unity. Why is this true? Because of all the forms of discrimination that we face as a district, the one embedded in structural social practice is the one determined by racism. Our union was effective at fighting against all other forms of otherization, but still lacked the power to compel results at the bargaining table because it was divided from within, reflecting the structures in place around it. Not only was the district geographically segregated due to years of redlining and mortgage covenants, it was occupationally stratified by color as well, with most of the teachers identifying as white, and associate educators and special education assistants are classified for the most part as black. This legacy predates the waves of immigration that brought other aggrieved ethnicities to the Twin Cities. This heritage was so strong that it resulted in two separate unions over the years. MFT Local 59 for the mostly white teachers, and MFT Local 59 ESP for the mostly black education support professionals who supported them in the classroom. Unlike other major cities such as St. Paul, Chicago, or New York that have unified unions, Minneapolis essentially still had separate unions for white and black workers, rationalized by licensing differences and pay scales. What we needed was a comprehensive program, a list of demands that all educators, black or white, can agree with. I'm talking about baseline grassroots solidarity around issues we all share in common as educators and stakeholders in Minneapolis to correct some of the structural iniquities many of us take for granted, such as hiring more licensed black educators and treating the ones we've got fairly. We identified these basic issues and did not complicate this solidarity with purity tests or subject each other's demands to some sort of intersectional arbitrage. We also stopped conflating racism with other issues and accept our common shared humanity, putting ourselves to the task of fighting for each other. Not understanding the centrality of racism to this process was not only disrespectful and divisive, it was also dangerous and deprived our teachers of the leadership our black members could uniquely provide, for it was they who experienced the brunt of the iniquities in the district over the years, the anger of which was evident in their militancy, a quality sorely needed if the Union would endeavor to win the strike. First and foremost, the Union demonstrated its sincerity to the community it served by engaging in issues of concern to the families of students rather than carrying out performative acts of symbolic gestures, well in advance of the strike action. Some of these relationships were developed during the marches and rallies that followed police shootings of innocent black youngsters over the past 5 years. Many of these victims were our students. In fact, I knew one of them personally. Dante Wright was in one of my classes about 4 years ago. Sweet kid. Many of these affinities were deepened during the pandemic when the union ran a diaper bank and delivered meals for district families. During the uprisings following George Floyd's murder at the hands of police, these relationships were galvanized into solid bulwarks of community service. Secondly, white teachers learned to step aside and let black teachers have their say and assume leadership positions in the union. Suppressed for too long in this district, the powerful militant voices of black educators were just what the union needed to lead it forward. Remember, we are not talking about diversity and inclusion. We are talking about rectifying a very specific, long-standing systemic exclusion and accepting leadership. Thirdly, the forum that these new leaders developed their voices in was at each school site, over 85 in all, and each developed its own dynamic leadership responsive to local needs. This decentralized form of organization allowed each site to democratically cultivate the kind of approach each needed to engage their families and neighborhoods in support, while the local officers served to coordinate their initiatives rather than dominate the discussion. When the local officers did play a role, it was to initiate or coordinate unity building exercises such as marches on the district headquarters or state capitol, or stage rallies celebrating our teachers, extolling our demands, and featuring well-known guests to speak on our behalf. It also paid attention to the ethnic and language differences among members, students, and their families, and published material in all languages common to the district. In this way, the organization we built in preparation for the strike was completely scalable. Lastly, we conducted professional development trainings within the district and around the state to combat the racist tendencies in members and redeem what we could of who had been derisively and divisively referred to as deplorables, when many were just ignorant people who needed to be educated. Who would find a way to help them understand? After all, 41% of all teachers in Minnesota voted for Trump in 2016. It was surprising how many people don't know that race is not a pre-existing condition. During our trainings, people also learned how racism touches all of our lives and how many different guises it takes to work its divisive ways. 5 years ago, half the theater walked out when our union sponsored a showing of 13th at the Capri Theater on Broadway because the young black people in the audience didn't trust our leadership. It conflated the issue of racism with every other form of discrimination on the books and didn't want to be used or manipulated. 5 years later, we had thousands on the streets from all over our communities and made national news. 5 years ago, we were dividing ourselves at an alarming rate. 5 years later, they couldn't divide us if they tried. 5 years ago, our union resembled the picture on the left. Today, we are the union on the right. Similarly, we learn the difference between waving the authorized fist of moral outrage on the left and making the true square-knuckled power fist of strength and unity that really makes change on the right. Sadly, we've been conned into replacing the power fist with the fist of moral outrage over the years. One thing's for sure, whether it's outrage or power, whatever you want to call yourself, if you're all in for students, families, and staff, I will always be your brother. Thank you for your time and attention. And oh, by the way, here are some resources for you should you like to find out where I got all these ideas.